Now today I'm just going to stand flat-footed behind this pulpit and talk to you about this 47th anniversary of our independence. 47 years ago, on a warm evening at Clifford Park, the flag of Britain, the Union Jack, was respectfully lowered, and the new black, gold, and aquamarine flag of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas was majestically raised on the flagpole, signifying an independent Bahamas. The number 47 is a combination of two very significant numbers in the Bible. First of all, 40 is often used for time periods. And you will see in the Bible 40 days or 40 years, which separate two distinctive periods. For example, just a few. The rains fell in Noah's day for 40 days and nights. Moses lived for 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in the wilderness, and led the nation of Israel for 40 years. Moses was also with God on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. The 12 spies searched the land of Canaan for 40 days. Israel wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Jesus fasted 40 days and nights in the wilderness. And Jesus remained on the earth 40 days after his resurrection and before his ascension. The number 40 also marks the beginning of a new generation. In Numbers chapter 32 and verse 13, we read, "So the Lord's anger was aroused against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness 40 years, until all the generation that had done evil in the sight of the Lord was gone." 7 in Scripture is the number of completeness and perfection, both physical and spiritual completeness and perfection. For example, just a few. God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days and rested on the 7th day, signifying the completion of his creation. God established for Israel 7 national feasts which were to be observed on an annual basis. Jesus, in the book of Revelation, spoke specifically to 7 churches. And God's judgments in the book of Revelation are described as 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls. Now we can go on and on and on with both 40s and 7s, but I just wanted to give you an idea of the significance of this number. Because biblically, both 40 and 7 were very significant. And here we are celebrating our 47th year as an independent nation. And in our country's 47th year, we've had to deal with 2 catastrophic events in a 7-month period of time. Interesting. 2 catastrophic events in a 7-month period of time. The first was Hurricane Dorian, in case we've forgotten. Sunday, September the 1st, 2019, it made landfall at Elbow Key in the Abaco Islands, and the rest is history. Secondly, the coronavirus, the COVID-19 pandemic. On Sunday, March the 15th, 2020, the first case in the Bahamas was announced. From September to March, a 7-month period, very short period of time, the nation had to deal with 2 major catastrophic events. Now, during both of these disasters, the Bahamian people have been described in 3 ways. And you might have taken note of them because I sure did. We have been described in the light of Dorian and COVID-19 as a resilient people. I don't know how many times I've heard the word over these 7 months. A resilient people. We have also been described as a resourceful people. And thirdly, as a religious people. And when I say religious, I'm not talking about in a negative sense. I'm talking about a people of faith. And so these three descriptions, a resilient people, a resourceful people, and a religious people, these are what I want to focus on this morning on this 47th Independence anniversary. So let's take a look at these three things. First of all, a resilient people. This speaks to the hope part of this year's theme. Pressing onward, a time of hope. And resiliency is in and of itself an expression of hope. There is no giving up. There is no throwing in the towel, because we are a resilient people. And as a result, our very actions as we express our resiliency speaks hope to everybody. Now let's begin by defining this word resilient. First of all, in reference to an object or a material item. Resilience is defined as the ability to return to the original form or position after being bent, compressed, or stressed or stretched. The ability to return to the original form or position after being bent, compressed, or stretched. It's like a rubber band. You stretch it out to its maximum. In stretching it out, you change its shape. But the minute you let it go, it goes back to its original form. And you can think about anything else that's made with that kind of elasticity and flexibility. You bend it over and you change its shape, you let it go, and it bounces right back to its original form. That's resilience. To spring back, to be bent out of shape, but having the ability and the capacity to spring right back. Also, it is defined in reference to a person. And it is defined as the ability to recover easily and quickly from shock, illness, hardship, or setbacks. Resilient. The ability to recover easily and quickly from shock, illness, hardship, or setbacks. Now, in the recovery process, it may not look like it's an easy thing to do. But after you've worked all the way through it, and the recovery has taken place, when you look back at it, then you will say to yourself, you know what? It was hard going through it. But when I look at the result of it, it was an easy task, relatively speaking. And so the other meaning of the word, or definition of the word in relation to a person, is irrepressible. Irrepressible. The ability to recover and to be irrepressible. All that simply means is you may push me down, but you can't keep me down. You may press me down, but you can't keep me down. You may beat me down, but you can't keep me down. That's resiliency. So when you hear somebody on the news, whether it's a reporter, whether it's a politician, talk about the Bahamians being a resilient people, that's what they're talking about. You can knock us down, but you can't keep us down. You can push us down, but you can't keep us down. You can beat us down, but you can't keep us down. We will bounce back. That's resiliency. Let me give you a couple examples from the Bible of resiliency. Now, I don't have the time to develop these fully, but you are familiar with both examples. Joseph's brothers threw him into a pit. God's call was already on his life. His brothers threw him into a pit, sold him to the Ishmaelites, who sold him to Potiphar in Egypt. Ended up in a prison, life seeming to be done, finished. But the call of God was on his life. And in spite of it all, the resiliency in Joseph, even though he faced some difficult situations, the resiliency in him helped him, along with God's help, to bounce back and become the number 2 leader in the entire land of Egypt. That's resiliency. He could have given up the first time they threw him in the pit. He could have given up when they sold him to the Ishmaelites. He could have given up when they sold him to Potiphar. He could have given up when Potiphar's wife caused him to end up in prison. He could have thrown in the towel and forget the whole deal. But resiliency is what brought him back. And he came back better and in a more higher position than he was when they threw him in the pit. Secondly, Delilah cut Samson's locks. His 7 locks of hair. And as a result of that, she stole his anointing. They threw him in prison, hooked him up like an ox to grind out the corn, plucked out his eyes so he was unable to see. But while in that prison grinding out the corn, his locks grew back. And when his locks grew back, his anointing came along with it. Nobody knew what was happening in the prison. Nobody knew what was happening as he ground out the corn. But the locks and the anointing was returning. And suffice it to say that in his death, Samson killed more Philistines than in his life. Resiliency. He toughed out the prison. He toughed out the blindness. He toughed out the abuse. He toughed out all of the negativity that came his way. Resiliency and the hand of God brought him back to where he was with God originally. That's what we are talking about when we talk about a resilient people. Let me give you one more. The Apostle Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9, we are hard pressed on every side, yet not crushed. I love it. Hard pressed. In other words, the pressing has the ability to crush you. The pressure of the pressing has the ability to crush you. But the Apostle Paul said, yeah, we are hard pressed, but we are not crushed. He says, we are perplexed, but not in despair. Perplexed, wondering what's going to happen, unable to figure things out, unable to understand fully what's going on. We are perplexed, he says, but not in despair. In other words, not without hope. We are not hopeless. Yes, we are perplexed. We may not be able to put our hands on everything and figure everything out exactly as we would like to, but we are not hopeless. You know, I alluded to this a couple Sundays back. When COVID-19 was at its worst in the Bahamas, I mentioned that we, as pastors, along with 6 others, came to this building every Sunday to make sure we had a live stream service for our members. But every time I left my house, I asked God, please protect me. I can't bring this virus back to my house. I had a son-in-law in my house who was very, very sick and still recovering. An 8-year-old grandson in there, and my entire family inside of that one house. I could not afford to carry COVID-19 back home. But we came out in spite of it. We came out because we are resilient. We are resilient. We were determined. that in spite of what's going on and the risk that we were taking in leaving the safety of our homes to drive along the streets and to come out here and to do what we did, the resiliency that we had to make sure that what the church was supposed to do it would not stop doing, and what God required of us would not come to an end, and the people who were on lockdown and shutdown were still able to connect with their church, even though it might have been in a limited manner. We still determined we've got to do this. But it was scary sometimes, because then we weren't sure what the virus was all about. You know, people were talking about, it can float in the air. Well, by Job, if it could float in the air and I'm outside my house, I'm at risk. We did not know all of the facts as yet. And that's what resiliency does. It enables you to function in spite of. The Apostle Paul goes on and he says, we are persecuted but not forsaken, struck down but not destroyed. That's the Bahamas today. Struck down but not destroyed. Listen, we've been struck down before. We've been struck down many times over the years, but we're still here. And the Bahamas is a greater nation than it was in 1973, and it's a greater nation than it was in 1903. We are still here in spite of the many times that we've been struck down. And the reason why we are still here is because we are a resilient people. We know how to bounce back. We know how to be stretched and pulled in every which way, but we know how to bounce back to our original position and formation. That's who we are as a Bahamian people. Real Bahamian resiliency will be visible for the world to see when Abaco and Grand Bahama have bounced back completely from Hurricane Dorian. And a lot of work is being done. Yes, there's a lot of complaining going on at the same time, and I understand all of that. But there's a lot of work that's being done, and Marsh Harbor will rise again. Abaco will rise again. Freeport will rise again. East End will rise again. And I am telling you, because I've lived long enough in this Bahamas to see it, the day is going to come when you are going to travel to Abaco and Freeport and the other parts of Grand Bahama, and the only thing you will be able to see that will say something about Dorian are the remnants that's left behind. I'm telling you, because that's who we are as a people. And I'm not going to let anybody take that away from me. I don't care what the outside world says. I don't care what the opinions of those who don't live here might be. We are a resilient people. Resiliency in the Bahamas will be seen and visible for the world when the devastated economy of the Bahamas is restored, and it will be. I don't care what Standard and Poor's have to say, it will be restored. I don't care what Moody's has to say, it will be restored, because that's just who we are. We may bend, but we'll bounce back. That's just who we are as a people. Resiliency will be seen by the entire world when Atlantis and Bahama are fully reopened and the Bahamian people's jobs are restored. I'm telling you, it's who we are. It'll be seen when Bahamian businesses are fully reopened and able to provide full, unrestricted service to their customers. Resiliency will be seen by the world when COVID-19 is defeated in the Bahamas and we are free from face masks, free from hand sanitizers, free from social distancing, and free from nightly curfews. We're going to bounce back. And we will recover because we are resilient. Pressing onward, a time of hope. Number two, We have been described as a resourceful people. This speaks to the triumph part of this year's theme. Pressing onward, a time of triumph. A time of hope, but also a time of triumph. Let's define the word as we did resilient. It is defined, the word resourceful is defined as the ability to deal skillfully and promptly with new situations, challenges, difficulties, and hardship. Let me read it again. Resourceful, the ability to deal skillfully and promptly with new situations, challenges, difficulties, and hardship. It also is defined as ingenious, capable, and full of initiative, especially in dealing with difficult situations. Let me read that one again, because I've seen it amongst our Bahamian people. Ingenious, capable, and full of initiative, especially in dealing with difficult situations. Let me give you some examples of that at work in this country. We've seen it in government, our political leaders. Now, I got a couple of things to say about politics before I'm finished with this point. So take your PLP hat off, take your FNM hat off, because the two of y'all gonna get it. It ain't gonna be bad, but I gotta say just a couple of things. We've seen it in government. The Prime Minister of this country having to implement the emergency powers regulations was an effort to put into practice the resourcefulness of this country in order to preserve our lives. It wasn't easy, but it had to be done. He could have taken a less resourceful position, and perhaps some of us would not be sitting in this congregation right now. Having to issue lockdown orders and lock this country down, lock us down on weekends, lock down the borders, shut down businesses. If you think for 1 second that that was a difficult thing to do, you are mistaken. I don't care whether it would have been Perry Christie, the Honorable Perry Christie, or the Honorable Prime Minister now. It would not have been an easy thing to do. But somebody had to be sitting at a table, exercising their minds, exercising their Bahamian intellect, their Bahamian understanding, their Bahamian ingenuity, their Bahamian knowledge, their Bahamian wisdom to put a plan together to save this country. The destruction of COVID-19. So we've seen it in government. We've seen it in our healthcare system. Our healthcare leaders had to step up to the plate and deal with a virus that they were unfamiliar with. They had to learn on the fly. They had to seek knowledge and understanding from the outside agencies, like the World Health Organization and PAHO. They had to seek knowledge and understanding as much as was available about the virus in order to help the Bahamian people. But listen, they were resourceful healthcare leaders. And I applaud every one of them, including the resigned former Minister of Health, Dr. Dorian. They did an excellent job. They stepped up to the plate. And the same applies with Hurricane Dorian as well. They had to convert our facilities to make sure that should the pandemic run uncontrollably through our country, that we would have had enough facilities equipped to handle and take care of our people. They had to come up with quarantine facilities in order to care for people. They had to do testing and treatment. All that came upon us in the moment of time. They had to adjust, and they had to make it happen and make it work. And today we can stand before the world and say, as bad and as sad as it is, only 11 persons died as a result so far of this disease. They worked hard. So we saw it. We've also seen it in business. Business persons had to step up their game. They had to use their resourcefulness. As we said, their ingenuity, their initiative, their skill to deal with something that they had never faced before. Businesses had to make adjustments to operating online. Only businesses who had already employed the use of the internet in their business establishment knew what this was all about. Most businesses did not have an online operation. So business owners had to immediately begin to use the resourcefulness that we have as a Bahamian people to address this situation in order for their business to survive. And they did. Online services, curbside deliveries, who would have ever dreamed? Deliveries to your business place. Be ordered lunch, and somebody comes and delivers it. What's happening in this country? Resourcefulness. Listen to me, this ain't just for the Americans. This kind of resourcefulness is not just for the Americans, it's not just for the Europeans. Bahamians have the same kind of ability. And we stepped up to the plate in the arena of business, and we made our adjustments. And there were, even as a result of this, new business ventures. We now have in this country a face mask industry. Yeah, you can laugh at that one, but it's true. A face mask industry. You can order a face mask online, or you can buy a Bahamian face mask. I am tempted, but I'm not going to do it. I was going to, thinking about asking everybody with an Independence face mask on to come up here on the platform so that you can just see the design and the beauty and the skill and the genius in what we have done in our country. That's resourcefulness. That's resourcefulness. We also saw it in education. Virtual classrooms, Mr. Cunningham. Listen, in an overnight period, our schools had to adjust to this and set up virtual classrooms in order for education to continue. That was not the norm, but overnight it had to be done. Mr. Cunningham, Mrs. Porter, Dr. Rutherford, the leaders of our school had to scramble to get stuff in place in order for us to be a part of this new norm, so to speak. But the resourcefulness in our people, again, stepped up to the plate. And eventually we got the hang of it. And were able to continue educating our children. Online virtual quizzes, virtual tests, virtual exams, and finally we closed out the school year with virtual graduations and drive-through graduations. I'm telling you, in this 47th year of independence that we are marking, it's a very significant year in the Bahamas. But and it is so because we were stretched. We were bent backwards, and because we are resilient, because we are resourceful, we were able to respond to it. We were cast down, but we were not destroyed, and we bounced back, and here we are today. Lastly, churches had to adjust. Now, Evangelistic Temple, we've been doing live stream for years. I think us and BFM, we probably pioneered live stream services. So we were doing live stream for a long time. But the vast majority of churches in this country never did anything as far as live streaming any service. It was just not something that was done. But now just about every church, either they are live streaming even today via Facebook, or they purchased the equipment like we did in order to live stream, or have a live stream set up right here at the church itself. So we live stream on two venues. Our own venue on our web page, as well as Facebook Live. But there were a lot of churches that never did anything like this. But again, because we are a resourceful people, listen to me, because we are a resourceful people, we stepped up to the plate and performed at a high level. YouTube Live, virtual meetings via Zoom. Most of our churches, we did none of this kind of stuff. It wasn't necessary. But we stepped up to the plate because we are a resourceful people. Now listen to me as I wrap this second one up. The realization of the resourcefulness of Bahamians can be even greater if we kept our politics out of it. Abaco would be further on today. Grand Bahama would be further on today if we kept our politics out of it. And that's government politics and opposition politics. Because we are a resourceful people. And what happens is that we limit the impact of our resourcefulness because of our politics. If you don't support me, then I'm not going to use you. If you're not on my side, I'm not going to use you. And so some of the best minds in our country are never called upon because of politics. That's wrong. That's wrong. Why do we politicize national tragedies? Y'all better hear me today. Why do we politicize even national tragedies? Listen to me. When a national tragedy hits this country, it hits FNMs and it hits PLPs. National tragedies do not discriminate. When Dorian passed through Abaco and passed through Grand Bahama, both PLP homes were destroyed and FNM homes were destroyed. PLP businesses were destroyed and FNM businesses were destroyed. FNM lives were lost and PLP lives were lost. You don't politicize national tragedies. When COVID-19 struck, did COVID-19 decide it's only going to stop by PLP homes? It's only going to stop by FNM homes? No. It swept through our country with no respect or any regard for what color you wear or what label you apply to yourself. So if the tragedy does not discriminate, then why do we politicize national tragedies? National disasters call for a national response, not a partisan political response. And all governments are guilty of this. And all oppositions are guilty of it. Because you are in opposition doesn't mean that you are supposed to oppose the government on every single thing. And even when it's something that has to do with the lives of your followers as well, because you are opposition doesn't automatically mean you have to oppose. If it's something that's going to be for the betterment of the Bahamian people, regardless of politics, then you ought to support it. And if you are the government, because we are a resourceful people, we have smart people in this country, knowledgeable, experienced, well-versed, expertise, professionals in this country. Because they do not support you does not mean that they ought not be called upon to help do something for the betterment of the Bahamian people. Come on, man. We've got to mature. We've got to grow up in our politics. All governments and all oppositions have been guilty. Going back to the old days of the UBP, they did the same thing. If you weren't white, you weren't right. So they wasn't going to call upon the PLP fellas to do anything. Then the PLP fellas got in power. And if you weren't black, you weren't right. So they weren't going to call upon the white fellas to do anything. Then the PLP grew, and opposition parties came along. And then they took the same position when it comes to national matters that their old UBP fellas did, and didn't involve anybody that was of the opposing side. Then the FNM became government. And the FNM did the same thing that they criticized the PLP for doing and the UBP for doing, and now they were doing the same thing and not including people that could help with the national recovery and the national response because they don't support the party. That's wrong. We will never maximize our resourcefulness if that continues to be our attitude. When it comes to the Bahamian people, they have to be first and foremost in our mind. When it comes to the Bahamian people, we should want the best for the people. And if we want the best for the people, that means we ought to bring on board the best minds among the people, regardless of where they stand politically. Now, I know some people don't agree with me on that, but that's your business. You're free to disagree if you want to. It is wrong for the Honorable Prime Minister to deny knowledgeable Bahamians from contributing to a national recovery. And it is wrong for the leader of the opposition to criticize everything that the Prime Minister tries to do for the betterment of the Bahamian people. So they're both wrong. Listen, man, when I don't have a job, I don't care whether the FNM or the PLP in power. When I can't pay my light bill, I don't care if the FNM or PLP in power. When I can't buy food, I don't care if the FNM or PLP in power. When I don't have the ability to provide for my family, to pay the rent, to keep a roof over their heads, to pay a mortgage, to stop the bank from taking the roof over their heads, I don't care who's in power. Because that doesn't solve my problem. Forgive me, man, but I'm Bahamian. I'm tired of some of this nonsense that goes on in this country while people are suffering and people are hurting and people are hungry and people don't have jobs, people don't have money. Come on, man, let's grow up. in 2012, 2017, it is still the people's time. So come on, government and opposition, stop your petty games. All right, I don't like the way y'all. When somebody walks into that church office across the street and say that they need some groceries, do we ask them whether they are Anglican or Baptist or Assemblies of God? God would strike us down if we ever tried that nonsense. When they come in there, do we ask them if they are PLP or FNM or DNA or whoever else? Hungry belly have no label. You see, let me tell you why you should appreciate this church that you are a part of. Because I could get up here in this pulpit and I could say that without fear. I ain't got no crown land. I ain't got no taxi plate. I ain't got nothing. So ain't nothing hanging over this head. Ain't nothing to keep this mouth quiet. I for the people. Tell him again. I ain't got no crown land. I ain't got no license plate. I ain't got no taxi plate. I ain't got no jitney franchise. And I ain't got no hotel franchise somewhere. So if you're PLP and you mess up, I can tell you. If you're FNM and you mess up, I can tell you. If you're DNA and you mess up, I can tell you. Because the people is what is of utmost importance. We are resourceful. So let's use it. Another thing in this country. We're talking about independence, so I could say some things. If you want a government job, it's who your MP is or who you vote for. If you want a piece of crown land, it's who your MP is or who you voted for. If you want a government promotion, it's who your MP is or who you vote for. That's whether the PLP in power or the FNM in power. It's the same thing. Foolishness. Nonsense. If the person qualified, give them the promotion. If the person's qualified, give them the job. If the person's qualified, give them the crown land. We got to stop this nonsense. And instead of maximizing the resourcefulness and the resiliency of the people, you know what we are doing? We are maximizing the resourcefulness and the resilience of those who support us, and those who don't support us, we are pressing them down. And then when you press them down, you know what they say? You ain't gonna be in power all the time. Listen how wrong this is too. You ain't gonna be in power all the time. And when my party gets in power, I'm gonna rise and get what I want. This is so mixed up and messed up. It's ridiculous. But nobody wants to say anything. Pastors have zipped lips. They don't want to say anything because they're looking for something. If the government doesn't give it to them, then they're waiting until the opposition gets into power so that they can get it. So they keep their lips closed while the people are hurting. Shame! Okay. Let me go to number 3. Do you know, let me say this because some of you all don't know this. Do you know that there was a time not too long ago when this church was called a PLP church? Yes. You know why? Because when the PLP came to power, what year that was? After they, 2012. 12? No, before that. 2007, eh? Well, I could see you all know nothing but politics. You're all just like me. 2002. When they came to power in 2002 and they started the urban renewal program, our church was in the Prime Minister's constituency. And so the Prime Minister appealed to us to help with the program, and particularly in the Centerville constituency. So we brought the students and the children from urban renewal on this campus. We were across the street then. We brought them on this campus to hold their urban renewal band rehearsals. We opened up our girls ministry or missionettes program to the girls and our Royal Rangers to the boys. We helped the then Prime Minister restore a home around the corner and contributed to the restoration of others in the community there. And whenever there were events, urban renewal events, a lot of them were held on our property and a few in our building across there. And so whenever you had an event, because it was a government event, the Prime Minister would naturally be there. And so being the leader of the event and the member of parliament for the constituency, as a part of the program, he would speak. This wasn't our program now. This wasn't no ET program. This was their program. And so they called us the PLP church. What nonsense. Before that, we were called the FNM church. When the Honorable Hubert Ingram was the Prime Minister. You can't win for losing. So that's why you can't take any sides. So when you come into this church, we're going straight down the middle. Whoever the rock hits is the one you hear holler. But we don't play those games. I am never going to stand in this pulpit and tell you who I vote for. Never. Because the day I do that, I split this church in half. Split it in half. And any time after that, I say something that's against the FNM, the PLPs are going to rejoice. And anytime I say something good or something bad about the opposition or government, if they happen to be government, then the other side will rejoice. And you know what? When I talk good about one side, the other side are going to say he's on that side. When I talk good about the other side are going to say he's on that side. So I ain't gonna never tell you. So you don't play the political games in this church. We don't play the political games. And let me say this to you. If the most honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Hubert Alexander Minister, well, he is the Minister of Health, the most honorable Prime Minister, Dr. Hubert Alexander Minister, comes in here at any time, there is a national event, he will speak in this church. If the Honorable Philip Brave Davis comes in this church and it's a national event, he will speak in this church. Because when it comes to national events, they are just that, national events. They're not a church service. Now, when you come in here, because you are the Prime Minister, if you come in here on a Sunday morning to a Sunday morning service, then we are going to give you a good seat. You have nothing to come up here for. You are a person who has come to enjoy the service. If you are the leader of the opposition and you come in here on a Sunday morning, we will give you a good seat. But you will not come up here and have anything to say in a church service. That's the difference. That's the difference. And that's how you keep your hands clean. All right. Got to finish this one quickly. The Bahamian people are also a religious people or a people of faith. This speaks to the transformation part of this year's theme. Pressing onward, a time of transformation. Now, there are some things that are going to be transformed in our country. We know that. But I'm not talking about that kind of transformation. I'm talking about a spiritual transformation because this is very, very, very important. When Hurricane Dorian struck, all the talk was about God and prayer. When COVID-19 struck, all the talk was about God and prayer. Christians and non-Christians were talking about God and prayer. Citizens, residents, and visitors were talking about God and prayer. The rich, the middle class, and the poor were all talking about God and prayer. Black, brown, mango skin, and lily white were all talking about God and prayer. From East Bay Street to East Street, they were talking about God and prayer. From West Bay Street to West Street, talking about God and prayer. From Yamacraw to Yellow Elder, talking about God and prayer. From Cable Beach to South Beach, talking about God and prayer. That was the talk, and that was the emphasis. Apostles, prophets, pastors, evangelists, teachers blanketed the airwaves with devotions and scriptures and sermons and prayers. Public and private radio, public and private television, social media were covered with prayers and prophecies and sermons because we found ourselves in a hole and we weren't sure what was going to happen. Dorian had messed us up. Now COVID-19 was messing us up as well. the religious bones of the Bahamian people began to kick in. Because listen, we ain't stupid now. We know what to do when danger strikes. We know what to do when hardship comes along. We know when it's time to get on our knees and pray. We know when it's time to call on God. Because it's in us as a people. 47 years ago, when we were born, the fathers of independence cradled this nation in the preamble to our Constitution. Cradled the newborn nation in the preamble to our Constitution. And the foundation of the preamble was and still is Christianity. And the four corners of that foundation are these. Number one, an abiding respect for Christian values. An abiding respect. That means it's not supposed to go anywhere. Governments come, governments go, but that is never supposed to go anywhere. An abiding respect for Christian values. So if we want to see reverse transformation in this country, then let's start messing around with that abiding respect for Christian values and start adopting some other values. The second cornerstone of that foundation is the supremacy of God. This is what our fathers cradled us in. The supremacy of God. And the God they're talking about is the God of the Bible. This ain't no New Age God, no idol God, no philosophical God. They were talking about the God of the Bible. The supremacy of God. That means He's supreme. He's supreme above every political party in this country. He is supreme above every human being in this country, regardless of title or station or status. He is supreme over every court in this country. That's what our forefathers cradled us in. The supremacy of the God of the Bible. Third cornerstone, we are founded on spiritual values. Secular humanistic values are invading this country left, right, and center. Our students are going away to universities, being exposed to all of this humanism, all of this New Age stuff, all of this philosophical stuff and ideas. Their minds are being pervaded with all of these things. And if it is not arrested gradually and eventually, spiritual values will decrease and humanistic values will increase. And in short order, after a few generations down the road, if it's not arrested every time it raises its ugly head, the Bahamas, instead of being a nation founded on spiritual values, will be one that stands on humanistic, philosophical values. The fourth cornerstone of that foundation is that we are a creation under God. These men were so wise, they repeated something that I don't even know if we take note of when we look at the preamble to our Constitution. Here's what they said. We are a nation that recognizes the supremacy of God. And then they came along and closed it out by saying, we are a creation under God. Twice in the preamble, they tell us what our position ought to be as a country when it comes to God. And so, I implore our political leaders, especially because they are the ones that make the laws, be very careful, ladies and gentlemen, when you are writing laws for this country. Be very careful that you don't undermine the preamble to our Constitution, on which our forefathers said everything legal that followed the preamble ought to be based on the preamble. Do you understand that? The Constitution, all the laws ought to have as its foundation the preamble to the Constitution that I just read, those 4 pillars in particular. The day we deter or move away from that is the day we begin a descent into hell. So be careful. When leaders rise in our country, listen very carefully to what they say. Listen very carefully to their position on certain things. Listen very carefully to their position on certain laws that are being written with the intent of being implemented in the country. Listen. Every mouth that holler Jesus ain't saved. As a matter of fact, Jesus said, many will stand before me in that day and say, Lord, Lord. And Jesus will say, depart from me, I never knew you. Yeah, Lord, but we work miracles in your name. Yeah, Lord, we cast out demons in your name. Yeah, Lord, we heal the sick in your name. And Jesus, the Lord, will say, depart from me, I never knew you. So every mouth that hollers Jesus during the campaign is not necessarily a born-again mouth. Be careful. Because it's those persons, when they get into position where laws are written, will have an impact and an input into those laws. And then we can't do anything about whether or not they are passed in Parliament, because we would have had our say at the election. The only way we can do something or say something about it is if all of us turn up on Bay Street one time. And then maybe the politicians will listen. But normally and usually, laws are passed. The Bible still says, I close, and notice I only say I close once, so I know I've been preaching long. I know that I'm looking at the clock, it's right in front of me. I know it's long, but this independence. And plus there's only one service. So you still can get home way before 1 o'clock. If this was 2 services, the 11 o'clock people will not be leaving here until 1 o'clock anyhow. I close with these 3 scriptures. Psalm 9, verse 17. This is in relation to us being a religious or faith-filled people. Psalm 9:17, the wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God. I didn't say it. He did. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 34. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. And lastly, Brother Daniel read it as we opened the service today. Psalm 33, verse 12. Blessed is the nation. Dear God, our forefathers knew that. They knew that. And so they wrote it in to what this nation ought to be. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. The God of the Bible, the Lord. Lift up your head to the rising sun, Bahamas land. March on to glory, your bright banners waving high. See how the eyes of the world have been on the Bahamas from September of 2019. Behold, or see how the world marks the manner of your bearing, how you handle stuff. Your bearing, how you remain constant in hard, difficult times. Pledge to excel through love and unity, not politics, pledged to excel through love and unity, pressing onward, march together to a common, loftier goal, steady sunward, though the weather hide the wide and treacherous shoal. Lift up your head to the rising sun, Bahama land. And I said all that to say this: till the road you've trod lead unto your God. March on! March on, Bahama land, till the road you trod, treading through Dorian, treading through COVID-19, treading through a debilitated economy, treading through all these negative experiences. Lead unto your God, because that's who is going to bring us through. That's who is going to bring us out triumphantly. Triumphantly. Stand to your feet, please.